Well, thanks so much for joining everyone in person and online. This is 1STL's monthly sustainability lab. And again, I'm Anna Cott. I work at East West Gateway Council of Governments, and we help coordinate 1STL, our regional collaborative sustainability initiative. And we have these monthly events. This month we'll be discussing coordination for resilient urban forests. And next month we'll have folks from the City of St. Louis Planning Office discussed their strategic land use plan update. And as you all know, land use planning is, and land use is just very important for sustainably planned cities. And making them walkable, bikeable, transit oriented. So we're definitely looking forward to that. That's Tuesday, March 26th at 3:45, again on Zoom or in person at T-Rex. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Meridith Perkins to go ahead and get us started.
All right, thank you. I think I've got a chat going on here. I'm gonna leave that closed. Put it over.
You can, if you hit the red to get it out of your way.
All right, Anna, will you let me know if anything comes up in the chat that I'm not seeing then?
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Thank you all for being here. I don't know who to look at now, so I'm gonna look at the people here and thank you all on the Zoom universe for engaging virtually with us. This is kind of a new format with the Sustainability Lab. I'm used to giving a lot of talks and telling people what I know, and my hope for the next hour is that we can kind of learn a little bit from each other about what we all know and maybe what some aspirational goals are for where we're all heading when it comes to a resilient urban forest. And as I was kind of brainstorming how to format this for this kind of structure, the question that came up more often than not was planting trees where they're needed most. We say that often now in the work that we do at Forest ReLeaf. We use that word a lot when we're talking to national funders and the Forest Service and, you know, collaborative groups. Where they're needed most means a lot of the same things to a lot of us. We're working in under-resourced communities. We're working in low canopy areas. We're working in, you know, biodiverse voids. But I don't necessarily know that we as a region or particularly as a city have a great grasp on where they're needed most means. So as we talk about resilient, sustainable urban forest, I think it's really important for us to rally around that and come up with some good strategies and some good kind of definitions and guiding documents for where that's taking us. So hopefully we can, through the next 45 minutes, go through what does this mean? How do we align our organizations, residents, and funders to maximize the impact of canopy? So we don't get in the way of solar panels, so we support all the birds and bees and butterflies, so that we help human health, all the things. You know, 45 minutes, we got it. We did a little bit of introduction, and I know there's a lot of great people in the chat. So if you didn't get a chance, please put who you're with and your name in the chat, and Anna's gonna capture all of that stuff so we can kind of roll that out later. What I really want to acknowledge is that there's a lot of, even just in the introductions, I was gonna make everybody raise their hands, but I think ultimately it's important to acknowledge that there's a lot of influences when it comes to urban forestry. So if we're talking about local governments, City of St. Louis, we don't have MDC or our state. Online. Okay.
Josh.
So Josh Ward with Missouri Department of Conservation and Community Conservation. We have lots of nonprofits. We have lots of, you know, institutions, guiding folks. I'm curious, you know, we have concerned citizens. So understanding what brought everyone to the table is something that I maybe for just this initial group, we heard a little bit, but I'm curious if anybody here wants to kind of share why why you decided to come in person to have this conversation today.
Sorry. Besides starting this 5 years ago.
Yeah, right.
We're in the middle of doing a regional climate action plan for the St. Louis MSA. And the point of that plan is to get to net zero as a region. And, you know, we can't wait around for Ameren to fulfill their plan and all of the things that need to happen with transportation, all the other sectors. Trees, our healthy tree and biodiversity network in the region is going to be absolutely essential for becoming net zero and doing what we need to do as a region for climate action.
Thanks, Aaron.
Big picture.
And that's a big part of it when we talk about where we need trees the most for the climate change solution is a huge driver for so many people, young people especially, so much funding opportunity. But if we're not doing that strategically, we might not actually make the impact that we hope we do with climate. So being strategic about that is important. Anybody else want to share why you decided to spend your beautiful afternoon here in this boardroom?
Well, like I said, to kind of just understand about removing trees and planting new trees, because we got a lot of forestry people, so kind of give me an idea as if we cut down these bigger trees and we're reshaping the community. So in the urban eco block, some of the streets, alleys may not be the same, so they may be green spaces now. So how will we strategically plant those trees in order for us to build as well? And like I said, cutting down the bigger trees, and guys can give us some type of, you know, about how high the trees or what type of trees that are native to St. Louis and Missouri that we could plant that'll, you know, give us our green spaces and our shading, but not take away our solar gain.
So I love that you're here and this input, because as we work in urban spaces, the real estate that is our city is in such high demand. And if we can't play with this, like even in the green industry people, if we're in conflict and we both have sustainability as our primary focus, but if the trees are conflicting with the solar, or if the buildings are challenged with what we're doing, part of kind of being sustainable and resilient is looking broader beyond just the impact that the trees are having, but how we're elevating and supporting kind of the sustainability effort. And that, I think, goes along with what East West Gateway is doing too, but important to acknowledge those conflicts also. And so when we're making those plans, be as smart about those investments
So
and
planning
supportive.
process, right?
Yeah,
But think
exactly.
strategically about that while we're in the planning process.
And know where you guys, yeah, I think that's a really great impact, and I'm glad that you're here. Anybody else?
I'll go, yes. I'm here because I'm basically an introvert. I'm trying to force myself to
Welcome.
to meet the other sustainable, environmental people in the St. Louis area. I'm also here because I'm on the Maplewood Sustainability Commission, and I'm trying really hard to get the city to plant more trees, because we have one tract in our community that is considered overburdened with pollution and urban heat island effects and all kinds of stuff. And trees can help out with a lot of that. So I'm pretty much just here to learn too.
Well, and I would venture to say you're not the only introvert. And I think beyond the, personality type, I think all of us tend to stay in our silos. We tend to be focused on our projects, our commitments, and it's sometimes hard to put yourself out there and take the time to be in this broader conversation. So thanks for getting out of your comfort zone with us. Anybody online want to throw out anything in the chat as far as kind of inspiration or hopes and dreams for this short conversation that we're having? The main point that I want to kind of leave this slide with is that it's going to take all of us, and any kind of canopy goal or canopy initiative or plan that we put together is going to be strongest with the most diverse and interested perspectives. So hopefully we can find something that keeps everybody excited and engaged and that everyone can see some relevance in the direction that we're moving. Okay, so these are questions that I am curious about. And these aren't questions that I think we're gonna answer today, but the conversation starter and the interest that I have is really thinking through, are these the right question? Do we have answers to this? If someone today is like, oh yeah, no, we got this already. We don't, Meredith, you don't have to worry about that anymore. This is the time, throw it out there. But what I'm hoping that in the near future, in the region and potentially in St. Louis City in particular, we can all agree and put in writing a vision for the region, for the urban forestry canopy. What is it? What is it that we're all trying? What do we hope to see for the trees in the forest? There has been some conversations about it. Different people are doing kind of different strategies around it, but like, if we could just all agree and decide, is it a canopy cover percentage? Is it, what kind of strategy our vision is for the region? Can we define that priority area for urban forestry centered in equity and justice? Are the factors at play weighted differently across priority models? And I'll show that in a minute, but we kind of, all roads are sometimes leading to North City and North County, but for different weighted purposes, depending on what GIS maps you're using, depending on how much you're weighting socioeconomics, environmental impacts, canopy, stormwater, all the different things. So what are those priority areas and how are we aligning all of our programming towards that? How do we strategically get the most out of our collective efforts? So this is where I saw Tom pop up on the Tom Schweitz with GRG, the zoo, the Seed St. Louis's, the organization, neighborhood networks, the individuals. How do we all do what we do collectively so that we have the most wins? Humans, nature, neighborhoods, trees are beneficial for so many things. And one of the reasons why I love working in this business is because we can kind of connect trees to a lot of answers. But if we decide to plant trees for the birds, we might not necessarily have the biggest impact on watershed. If we decide that we're going to plant trees for solar, we might not have as big of impact on canopy cover in general, because we're planting smaller trees. So thinking about those priorities, weighting them. Yeah.
And it's probably couched in several of those bullets. The big question on my mind is what our changing climate goes. Think about new trees and new pests and new different whatever's coming down the pike for that.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I'm not familiar with the metrics or the language, but I'm sure there are a lot of plans that already exist in the area that address canopy trees, a lot of these hot button items that you've addressed. I know there are plans out there, but I can't.
I got a slide for that coming up.
Okay. So my guess is I'm always the one who jumps ahead and thinks, oh, I know where this is going, and I don't. But my guess is that eventually you or this group or whoever it is wants to get to the point where we develop some sort of a master plan.
What is the best way to set a roadmap for the tree canopy goals?
And I'm sure that you know this, and I'm sure a lot of people in here know it. The time is, it's always perfect to do this. The time is always perfect. Now's the best time to plant a tree, right? But funding is available. Another round was announced today. So we got to have our act together and go after some of that funding and put it together. And again, I'm just going to jump way ahead.
Love it.
My wish here, if there is a wish, is that this plan would be developed with some originality, creativity, and usefulness. I know we've been bouncing the word sustainability around. I wrote these plans for years. You know, I did Pittsburgh, I did Thunder Bay, Ontario, you know, the list goes on. And I'd like to say they were all great plans, you know, but in terms of functionality, a lot of them were a complete flop. So I'm hoping that whatever effort is made here, that it's creative, new, fresh, and doable. And it's done in terms of a collaborative partnership, which is the reason why I'm here today. When I saw that this wasn't just this entity or 2 or 3 entities, this excites me, you know, that there are so many voices and so many concerns, needs, goals that will be part of this, so.
I also wanted to mention Michael Sunday online said we've worked on mapping projects in the region and would love to be a part of something that helps get trees in the ground and benefits people. And Michael, do you know?
Michael's with MoRap, and I
Oh,
actually
okay.
have a link for Michael too, and I think he could be a very influential part of this conversation. So good, thank you for joining, Michael.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you. Was there somebody? Said something? Oh. Skip, you basically just summarized the whole thing, which is
Sorry.
perfect. No, because we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into exactly what I think Skip articulated so well, that there's a need right now for all of us to bring all of our little silos and focus areas together, because a lot of that funding is honestly too big. It's too hard because it's too big. If you're trying to apply for a community change grant and it's a minimum of $10 million, I don't even know how to hold $10 million at Forest Relief. And how do we work with the city? How do we work with each other to bring all those projects so that we can compete, honestly, is how we're not even competing against each other. We just can't compete at all unless we're working together. So it's a great time.
There is a question in the chat too, Meredith. What funds were just announced? I think that was mentioned while I was.
Is it another IRA funding that came through today that you're talking about?
It's essentially the second round. Yeah, I
So was it through the Forest Service or through the EPA?
want to say it's Forest Service.
Forest Service.
I'll pull it up.
Yeah, pull it up and see. So the federal government is releasing all of this Inflation Reduction Act funding for climate change, resilient communities, environmental justice, and trees are a component of almost all of those plans, or could be. And so we find ourselves at Forest Relief at this intersection of maybe being a leader in a project, being a part of other people's projects, and not quite knowing, I think there's so much confusion that sometimes we just can't move forward with taking the opportunities for these types of things.
It's the call for the round 2 RFPs, so request for proposals, about 120 million in this go around.
Through Forest Service or? EPA?
Well, this came from Philip, so Philip Rodbell.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's Forest
Forest
Service.
Service.
I'll pass this on.
Yeah, and we can share it with the group in a follow-up. There's more funding. I've been in urban forestry for 25 years and worked with state governments for, a number of those decades. And there's more funding available now than ever has been invested in the last 20 years of urban and community forestry, at least through the Forest Service programming. So they're ready to make a change. And so we just need to be able to be creative and collective enough to know what that change should be and drive that for St. Louis.
Tell you how easy it is to get a piece of that. What did you guys get last year?
$1 million.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to say like they did nothing and it was just handed. Ellen would be
They know something.
willing to spend hours telling you what they had to go through, but it's doable. It's doable. So $8 million. All right. So this is
Alan, who's
this is-
gonna got dollar
this is
bills
the
in his
time.
pocket.
This is the time.
So if we look at what our actual vision is, I think that's something that no matter where we're coming from, individuals, nonprofits, companies, if we kind of can center on We want a resilient, sustainable tree canopy. And we all agree at least to that amount, that we're all vested in that future and that vision, then that's the first, I think, level. And then from there, we all have a role to play, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but thinking through, what do we expect to see? Green, well-planned communities, manageable maintenance. So we're not spending all 8 million just removing and pruning dead and dying trees, but we're planting and bolstering that. We have healthier humans, increased biodiversity. We have a robust green workforce. A lot of this funding is also looking forward to pathways for, green industry jobs, and really starting to get that workforce ready to support the investment that's hopefully coming. Connected parks and trails. So what is it that what else that we want to see? What are the metrics, those SMART goals that everybody learns about in these plans that may or may not actually function? But what can we physically do? Forest ReLeaf in particular is a doing organization, which is exciting. We actually get to do the thing. It's the reason why it's one of my favorite jobs. But if we don't know how to move the needle to do the thing and how it connects to the broader goals, it's hard to tell that story, hard to show that impact, hard to then compete for additional funds or get more people on the bus. So mainly, I just want to put this there to think through as we start articulating what the vision is for the city, thinking about a lot of the stuff that East West Gateway is putting together in the climate plan, a lot of the things that we're all working through, and how does that work locally with our own programs and aspirations? How does it work with a city? And then how does it work along the region? So kind of that nesting doll approach. It's important for Forest ReLeaf, I think, and many of us, to consider the fact that it's not only about the nature, and that so many of us come into this field through the lens of nature, but the socioeconomic, racial health data is really important and informs us. The momentum and the priorities of local communities is driving us. Environmental impacts, where there's solar plants that are growing up that we wouldn't want to be planting trees, where there's big pollution sources where we want to be mitigating more. All of those things are influencing a lot of where they're needed most when we start talking about trees, and it can be pretty complicated. The first book that I ever read when I was doing a high school report on urban forestry, when it was like almost not a thing, was The Simple Act of Planting a Tree. Who's old? Skip, you probably know that book. It's basically like the simple act of planting a tree. Just go out and plant a tree. But it isn't that simple. And all of these influences and all of these different things are informing us now, and we're learning decades after decades later that we need to take all that into consideration. And quite frankly, it can sometimes be sort of debilitating, where you almost get to the point where you can't make a good decision, so it's hard to act at all, or so slow to act that we're not able to move the needle fast enough, or take advantage of opportunities. So this is all stuff that we just have to think about, and we have to put into a purposeful plan, and it takes a minute to sit on your pocket to do it, but we're there. Short of reading through all of this, is there anything that anyone in the room wants to kind of contribute as far as things that we should be considering as we think about urban tree canopy, urban and community tree canopy, that's worth mentioning or discussing at this point in the conversation? Things that we haven't touched on.
Hey Meredith, can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks,
Okay,
we
I'll
can
speak up.
hear you.
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. Oh, there it is. Okay, I can raise it now, but I won't. I think for me, like in our role at Great Rivers Greenway, what we've seen a lot, time and time again, is like not a primary focus on maintenance. I know you have it listed here, but like that is a huge barrier for success on these planting projects. So I just want to kind of double click, I guess, on that sort of area to like, we need to consider maintenance. Right now, we need to kind of think about how we can build capacity. And it's tough because we're so we're a very kind of divided community, right? Everybody has their own neighborhood projects or community that they're dealing with. But we really need to be coming together to address some of these issues.
Thank you, Tom. Aaron, do you want to say anything about kind of maintenance? And that's kind of a lot of what you've been working on.
Well, yeah, so my organization, we work with the Forestry Division of St. Louis to attempt to organize volunteer tree care for city, street and park trees. And so I think there's a huge gap in knowledge for residents to be able to contribute. And of course, there's not ordinances to support that, right? Like we operate sort of outside the strictly legal.
I got my forestry card.
We are very, I think the ordinance though, is like, I don't know if the ordinance is like, has a carve out for our activity though, is what I'm saying. But yeah, like, it's one of those things, like, I think it's really important to clarify those things and provide accessible resources and, you know, because like, that's one of the things, like just knowing what kind of tree saw or should you use bypass pruners, like which ones are good and like, right, there's such really simple, basic things that like can slow people down. Like even with watering a tree, people get like hung up on like, you know, the specifics of like, what do I do with the hose or how do I use the bucket? And like, it's like so easy for them to be daunted because it's so unfamiliar. Like people are used to just like seeing trees and like interacting with them in sort of a fairly passive sort of way. Like tree appreciation is what most people do, right? Like, so yeah, I think that's super important to like both look at ways to improve what, you know, municipalities do, of course, but also ways to engage the public, right? Because community science is a growing thing. And I mean, but there's also, right, like really a great opportunity to use technology as a resource to marshal the public in a controlled, supervised way for the good of the canopy, not just, we gave you a saw and hope for the best, right?
Right.
So yeah, and then aside from that though, I really am interested in sort of the policy or even more specifically maybe process aspect, right? Because like the way that different departments' policies interact, right? Like does the streets department and their rules about the tree lawn, right? How does that interact, right? Because they'll tell people you can pave the tree lawn, no big deal, right? And it's like, okay, maybe that's not a big deal in some places. It's a big deal in some, like, you know, right? Like we should be trying to preserve our trees and our tree lawns, in theory, one would think. But like there's these gaps in sort of the system and it's not all within the forestry division. And right, like there's things that we aren't taking advantage of, right? Like there is the zoning code something, right? Like that we should look at as like, how does that tie into forestry and landscaping requirements and things and like the protection of trees during development. So, right, like there's a lot of things that tie in that maybe aren't obvious at first. And I think it's really important to look at those closely because they can really undermine the effectiveness of your policies.
I totally agree. And I think the more we can acknowledge the gaps in the policies that are there and in this sort of roadmap, it doesn't necessarily just have to be, where are we going to plant trees next? Where are the available planting spots? But it can also really encapsulate how are those trees going to be stewarded and maintained, like Tom mentioned. And that could be, you know, it's going to take 10 years to solve the problems or to start implementing the things that we're daylighting through the process, but engaging citizens, what are those problems? Developing, you know, local leaders or stewards that we, you know, volunteers or now paid, you know, we're recognizing that maybe in certain areas we can't rely on willing and able volunteers, that we would need to start supplementing that or finding different workforce programs. But then on the policy standpoint too, really looking at, okay, if we want this to be sustainable, what are the systems in place that we need to start advocating for changes at that level? And it could be interesting. I think I saw a couple of hands raised, and Alan, maybe you
Yeah.
go, and then we can
I mean,
get to.
with policies, I agree, maybe we look at some policies, but a lot of times there's laws out there, there's policies out there, it's just enforcing those or making sure that everybody abides by those, and it could be lack of staffing on a department's end. But I do want to say, as far as the maintenance, the $8 million that we did receive, a lot of that money, I would say, 75% or so is toward maintenance. It's not the federal government just to, here's $8 million, go plant trees. So they are looking at that, and we're proof of that.
And to say that too, and to Skip's point about now is the time, I think the flexibility in the federal funding is so refreshing, if I could dare say that about federal funding. It really does open the door for some creative solutions. They're looking for ways to solve the problems that haven't been solved. And so, supporting maintenance is a huge move, step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's not maybe just, just grow your canopy. Can you have a healthy canopy out there?
Right.
And that's what the residents want. They don't want just more trees that have the limbs falling or have poor structure. We need,
Right.
if we want the residents to be on our side, we need to have a healthy forest out there.
May I speak? I'm Susan Armstrong. I'm on the University City Stormwater Commission. Some of the things you spoke about as an ordinance and structure, et cetera. We're a community that was founded in 1906. We're a 5-acre community with 30,000 trees. We have a Parks Department and Forestry Department that oversees 30,000 trees in their inventory. We have a tree ordinance, and recently we are working with the Stormwater Commission because we're 43% impervious surfaces in University City. And the goal is to engage the residents in land stewardship. So if they put in 100 square feet patio, they're required to offset it with a green infrastructure, whether it be a tree or a rain garden. And we're adding, in order to manage this, a flat work permit in addition to our building permit program. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That's exciting. And I think, the beginning of this conversation was talking about all the things that we needed, all the things, but looking to some positive examples too of success, like University City successfully implementing something, learning from those, so that we can all kind of emulate and support those types of projects expanding, I think is a really cool part of this collaboration also.
Thank you. We learned from the July 2022 flood.
Yeah, nothing like a disaster to teach you a really good lesson. I'm looking at more hands raised there. Bonnie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of mention something that I guess looks a little bit missing to me. It's probably buried in one of these other points, but maybe it's worth bringing it out. When we're talking about urban forests, it's not just about new tree planting projects or maintenance of planted trees, but we need to think about naturally occurring woodlands that are already part of our region and that are making up, part of our tree canopy, and how those are being maintained or lack of maintenance, whether they're on public or private property, and how they're under threat from invasive species and certain, insect pest species, things like that. Because, those are susceptible to we could easily lose all of that. And then they become tree deserts when they, aren't right now. But so I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that too, and not just new tree planting projects or like planting of trees, but maintaining the natural tree cover that already exists, or that's on the verge of, kind of flipping to not being a healthy woodland anymore and unable to provide all these benefits.
Thank you, Bonnie. I think that's a really important point. And I think for the folks that do the iTree calculations and understand the value of a mature tree is exponentially better than a newly planted tree. So if we're going to win the climate change battle, if we're going to move the needle at all, protecting the trees that we have is a critical part of that. So thanks for pointing that out. I buried that in preservation and development pressures, but I think your point about kind of invasive species and kind of healthy woodland is a great addition to that. Thanks, Bonnie. Catherine Warner. Hello. Are you able to chime in, Catherine?
She's got a mic.
Oops, sorry, I was just having a nice little conversation with myself. Yeah, saying hello to everybody. And, really appreciate this conversation. It's so great. And Bonnie, really like your point just now. Wanted to build on it just a little bit. What I'm seeing missing from this list is an intentional consideration or lens for biodiversity, for the ecological aspects, for ensuring that there's habitat for wildlife, that there are corridors, that the trees serve as those corridors that support the migratory bird species and things like that. So that we really are thinking regionally, eco-regionally and beyond for some of these like the migratory birds that, you know, that it's seasonally. But we're being very intentional about the interventions at a very micro scale. Could be those, the mini forests for biodiversity over brownfield sites in certain areas, and the larger scale, looking at the connections and just supporting all of the species, not just the human ones in the region.
Thank you, Catherine. That's an excellent comment. And I think that's one of the exciting things, having botanical gardens and the biodiverse city working group with 1STL. It seems like there's this momentum within the St. Louis region around native tree plantings and but it's not necessarily articulated in a plan that we all agree on. It's just something we all kind of know and take potentially for granted a little bit. So putting it into a document where we say we're lifting this up as something that is of value that we will continue to enhance and, you know, implement, I think has like a potential to be a strong opportunity. Tom.
Yeah, one other just quick point. And I love this point about community engagement being meaningful and not extractive, right? Community engagement and volunteerism is going to look different across different kinds of communities. I also think there's a tendency in our industry to kind of like over-index on what volunteers can actually accomplish. Like a lot of these maintenance tasks are really not suited for volunteers, and they need like a paid professional getting paid a living wage to do professional work in urban forestry. So I don't know if that's the creation of like a new program, you know, that engages folks through workforce development track to enter into those good forestry jobs in the region. But yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be considered.
Thank you, Tom. And Bob, give me 1 second. Just the community engagement part that we've talked a lot about too. And one of the reasons why I think all of us who potentially are working in community and trying to get information from community, that we recognize that we're asking the same dang questions over and over again to the same people who are community leaders. So if 1STL has a survey, GRG has a survey, and Forest Relief has a survey, and we're all trying to ask the same people the same questions, maybe we just do one survey. And then we don't have to have the burden of residents telling 100 people who may or may not feel like they're even getting listened to, because it's not actually showing up then in action. So collaborating with that community engagement in a way that's respectful of the community that we're asking, and then recognizing when, you know, we need to do something other than rely on volunteers to take more time out of their schedules to do things that we feel are of value. Thanks for that pause, Bobby. Go ahead.
One thing I was just going to say that I don't see was education. It could fall under social, economic, racial health, and it could fall under community engagement. But we need a strategic educational plan, because we have to generationally prepare our next generations for maintaining the maintenance and the upkeep and planting new trees and those type of things. So we really need an educational plan. I think one of the strategies that we used in Chicago was we went after the high school students. We selected 7 high schools, and we went after the high school students. And the high school students spread it much faster than the adults, because, you know, adults, we have a tendency to, oh, wait a minute, let's look at that, and the kid is just like, no, let's go for it, you know?
Uh-huh.
And when they start going home to their parents, taking out old chemicals and telling them to put in new green products, the parents is like, wow, my kid is just, you know, but it's spreading much faster. So I think an educational plan to be important at this point as well.
There's similar issues with education as with outreach. There's people trying to teach the same residents
That's right.
how to weatherize their home, or how to ride a bike, or how to plant a native garden. There's lots of people trying to hit the same people with more than just engagement.
I think a great collaborator in all of this would be the Missouri Environmental Ed Association.
Yeah.
You know, so folks who are already, like, to your point, like, let's make connections with the folks who are already doing that in those places, in those neighborhoods and in those communities where that's happening, and use their programs to get that done. Somebody mentioned citizen science. There's so much excitement in the K-12 space around citizen science, community science, so there's a lot of opportunity there. And especially with the campus ones, and then we have growing initiative on nature-based preschools, and getting that love to happen at that early age, it never goes by that.
Exactly.
So y'all are hitting on the, like, what I feel like all practical people do is like get right to like, let's do the thing, which is exactly where my mind always goes. And I think that's the beauty of highlighting these gaps, identifying that these are problems that we need to, if we're all trying to do any level of environmental education and everybody's target. I mean, we ended up at Forest ReLeaf canceling our tree camp this summer because we don't do camp. We don't have an educator. So if we then partner with someone who's doing that work to bring those messages, if we work together to make that impact, then maybe people can learn how to plant their vegetable garden and opportunities for solar and, you know, to understand apple trees, whatever. So yes, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm not sure how relevant this is to this or not, but have you considered maybe also adding assisted migration of some species? I have a degree in environmental science, and I learned that as climate warms, that some of the species that are currently here are not going to do as well, and they're eventually going to decline and die. But if you can find, say, like for an oak, for example, there's like an oak species that's south, that is maybe right now, its current range is south of Missouri. But since everything's gonna be shifting north above the equator, north of the equator, everything can be shifting north, and then below on the southern hemisphere, it'll be going opposite direction, obviously. But is there a consideration for maybe doing some work to try to find some species that can be, you know, cultivated here as young trees and maybe planted in a few areas to see how they would do?
I think the answer is probably. And I think that what we would definitely want to lean into is climate change and adapted processes for what we could align to say, these are a few actionable things that we want to work towards, and assisted migrating, you know, planting near natives, like all of those conversations are potentially in the mix for solving that problem for certain. I know we've looked at that. We plant a lot of southern Missouri trees that are native to Missouri that thrive. Yes.
Could I mention just one thing in the chat related to
Yes.
that Rachel Penzikowski mentioned, at WashU, I think, climate adaptation of different potential tree species and of genetic variants within species, interaction with pests and pathogens, simulations of tree benefits under different climate change models. She said WashU ecologists are eager to engage on these considerations. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
more
And
interest for a lot of these.
That's another huge demographic or like support network with Washington University and our research institutions that are all committed to a lot of this work and could fill in some, you know, technical information in an interest of time, because I want to make sure we just get through a few of these other things. I'm not going to go through all of this on Tree Philly, but I do want to get a little bit of examples for some things for you all to see kind of what I'm where I'm potentially going and hoping that we can go. The Philly Tree Plan is probably one of the newest master plans for the urban forestry. And it has kind of all the things that we've started to talk about, but I wanted to just read the vision. Philadelphia will be home to a resilient and equitably distributed urban forest that helps residents thrive in every neighborhood in our city. Trees on public and private land in the city will be recognized as a vital part of the city infrastructure and will provide environmental, social, economic, and health benefits for all present and future Philadelphians. I mean, it's kind of the kitchen sink, but it does state the things that, you know, Philadelphia values. And then they can go through the next iteration of what are the goals and how are we going to do that in the next 10 years, knowing we can't do everything. So my question to the group now is, we don't have the Philadelphia Tree Plan. What do we use right now to guide our work? I've got a slide, so we don't have to go through all of it because I imagine some people are going to have overlap, but I just want to open the conversation now, and I'll start with Forest ReLeaf. This is a clip from American Forest Tree Equity Scorecard. We started utilizing this as an opportunity for us to highlight where low canopy neighborhoods intersect with socioeconomically challenged communities, communities of color that have been historically under-resourced and supported. And so that's one element. That's a national tool. We have old 2022 data from an urban tree canopy. We have East-West Gateway land cover data that we're sometimes using that's tree canopy, but we don't have a guidebook that says this is our priority, this is the thing, this is why. We have a little bit of a shotgun. So I'm curious if anybody else wants to throw out anything that they're super excited about as far as what's guiding their work. Anybody on the chat that want to throw in a link, start the conversation going? Here's what I got so far. We got national land cover data. We've got the MU MORAP plant-based planning tool that's got a lot of tree layers. We've got the land cover data from East-West Gateway. We've got the city of St. Louis as a forestry inventory of all the trees in the city, mostly parks coming soon. Yep. We've got the St. Louis climate vulnerability plan from the city of sustainability. We've got heat vulnerability story maps. We've got the tier 1 MDC priority areas. We've got national tools that are gauging environmental justice, tree equity. So that's just a taste. We've also got all these other plans that are plans inside of plans or plans inside of programs that are also directing some kind of potential tree impact. The 1STL sustainability plan, our climate action plan. We at Forest ReLeaf use this Washington University environmental racism report for a lot of our kind of grounding. There's a forestry ash plan that Skip put together and Alan's putting into practice. All the parks have their own plans. So the point of all of this and all these lists is, one, to kind of put them in a place where everyone can access them. I tried to link as many as I could in the short amount of time I put my brain in this. But there's a lot of people doing a lot of this, and we're thinking a lot about it. And so how do we take these things and put them into a bigger, is it helpful maybe to align all of these little plans into a bigger plan? Is it more helpful to put our tree plan into an existing plan? Is it a sustainability? Is it right now 1STL was kind of the hub for a lot of this work? So is it a component of something else? The question of the plans that have purpose that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, making something that's accessible, that everyone has kind of access to and holds as a valuable tool. So maybe I just want to read the room on the planning, the burden of plans or the liberation of plans. Where do you sit?
Is that 2012 data? Is that the stuff that, that Forest Relief did with Tree Plotter and kind of the regional? You know,
See if it'll come up.
one of the beauties of technology these days, I mean, I remember the days trying to explain to people what this big brick was that I was carrying, that it was a GPS data collector, you know, and how amazing it was that it could map stuff, and now it's, you know, it's all right here. So it's not amazing anymore. It's right here. So this idea of tree canopy studies, I mean, the data's out there, you know, and all you need is somebody to say, hey, what area do you want? And you can do a vegetation analysis at almost the snap of a finger. Now, depending on how much analysis you want, you know, it takes a little while, but that might at least be a start. And I know it's just tree canopy cover, but at least then you kind of have a starting point, maybe. Just one of the many pieces here. That's the science part of it.
So when you say so that's kind of getting to the data that we have access to that data, and it just needs to be sort of manipulated and massaged in a way that is useful. Aaron, Anna, do you have anything to add on kind of how easy or potentially already existing some of that is?
I have thoughts about something else, but not.
Oh, okay.
that. Do you have thoughts, Ian?
Are we talking about the data?
Well, I could chime in about the, because MORAP did a land cover and we finished that for East-West Gateway in 2022. So there's at a reasonable level of resolution, there is an assessment of what canopy exists. But with the Planet Scope data now revisiting every day, you can get an even higher precision estimate of canopy cover with relative ease. I mean, it involves a classification, satellite imagery.
But you can go to neighborhood level, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to run a classification at a neighborhood level, that's like something that would run very quickly. I mean, you would need training data and that sort of thing.
But you, Michael Sunday, could do that for us. That's what I hear you saying.
Get them.
Thanks, Michael, thanks.
Sure,
All
yeah.
told. Anna, did you have something else you wanted to?
Well, I hope this is related enough. Originally when we were first talking about this, we mentioned the Philly tree plan as well as the Kansas City tree plan. And I had asked what came out of that tree plan, like how did they find it helpful? And if I remember correctly, they probably did use it to prioritize for applying for funding. And then there was also a tree preservation ordinance that came out of it. So I always just kind of keep those types of things in my head, like how could it be helpful, I guess, in the end?
That's exactly right. So the more I talk with people who have plans, the more we see the city of Philadelphia got 12 million from the IRA money. City of Kansas City also got 12 million. How many did you get on?
8.
8. So we left $4 million on the table
Come on.
because we couldn't tell.
Now, Kansas City's like the whole metro. I mean,
I'm just saying they had a
it's
plan.
not like St. Louis City is pretty small, so I think you did pretty well for it, you know.
I'm done throwing you under the
But
bus. You did great.
There's a larger geographical area.
Right.
I mean, yeah, Kansas City probably 2 to 3 times as large.
63 square miles.
Yeah.
Ability to cover.
But I guess the point that I want to make is if we don't tell people what we need and what we're gonna do with the money, no one's gonna give you the money. If you just say, give us the money, we're gonna do good things with it. We have a lot of people that care about trees. Sometimes they give you money anyway. But they won't give you as much. So thinking about it, and then to Anna's point, we asked Kansas City, like, was it valuable? That was a pretty budget plan. And so it kind of didn't recreate data. It didn't do a lot of things. There was some community engagement, but it wasn't as robust as some others. But what came out of it was they're able to at least say, as a city, these are the things, or as a region, these are the things we want to get accomplished, and we agree that we will. And so their like council bought into it, and then they were able to go back to the council when they had the ordinance up for review and kind of to Bonnie's point, they were like, you said you adopted this plan and it says right here in the plan that the ordinance should be blah, 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 blah. And, you know, we should have a tree ordinance. It should have these things. And so it kind of forced the hand a little bit of the city to say, okay, yeah, we will. Alan?
Oh, okay, so that's one government agency kind of you're tackling. I think in St. Louis, we've got 93 government agencies, so is it a city of St. Louis plan? I think looking around the room, it's a regional plan. So yeah, a little bit different, I guess, you know, we're not tackling just one government agency, tackling.
Well, that's a question on the table. And that's why I have the at what level on there. Is it, if we want it to be a practical plan that doesn't just sit at that high level, do we need very specific city plans that could roll up to a regional plan?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I think you move the needle, where you can identify within those government like decision makers and get them to agree and be accountable.
And it's where Kansas City had an advantage, you know, as Alan points out, it was more, you know, Kansas City is this, and the city of St. Louis is this. You know, if we look at St. Louis metro area, we're the same size, but 93 different entities. But didn't Kansas City also wasn't it? I'm trying to remember the name of the group. Was it Mark?
Mark, Mid-America Regional Council.
Yeah. So, you know, who's Mark around?
Well, no, it's not the Mid-America Regional Council is not they did not adopt the urban forestry master plan.
No, but
That was through the city specifically and
but was it
Parsons.
Mark behind the application for the grant?
Yes,
So who's Mark around here? Is it East West Gate?
yes.
We are the equivalent of Mark, but we are a quarter the size of Mark. So they have a lot more capacity and that comes out in responding quickly to grants. Takes us forever to put grants together to get approval for it.
Mark has been insulated, at least my perspective is Mark was insulated from a lot of crap. You guys have been mired in it, political influence since day one. And I'm speaking from an outsider on it. And it's not a dig, it's just what you're stuck with. It's what you deal with. You know, you have to balance 10,000 sticks, you know, and Mark sort of does too, but Mark has been pretty well insulated, at least my perspective of them. And I haven't dealt with them in a few years, but
I think,
more
go
insulated.
ahead.
Depends on the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that gets to the reality of all of these plans. So the next slide, I have a whole bunch of examples, I think if I can. I'm gonna skip to that. The reality is we aren't going to have a cookie cutter plan that we could just say, great, we like the Tree Philly plan, we're gonna do it that way, because their government infrastructure is gonna be different. Their organizational components are different. Their leaders and their quasi-governmental, or like everything is a little bit changed in the dynamic. So we can't just look at one plan and say, great, we're gonna do it this way, because of exactly what, you know, that conversation is. Like the political details and the players in the room are gonna change what gets lifted and what gets lost in that conversation. But they're great plans to look at and they're great lessons to learn from. And the benefit of not having gotten in the game in 2012, like I wish we would have, is that we do have a lot of examples to look at. We can learn the lessons and we can ask Austin, hey, back in 2013, you did this. What do you wish you would have done different? What actually did you get out of it? What should we be putting in hours that you didn't think about or consider? And maybe kind of move the needle a little bit so we don't have to do all that hard work. And again, the data technology is so much more readily available too, that we can see a lot more. You know, we got a lot in the early days of these plans. The big cost and hurdle was knowing what was out there, knowing
All you need
the
to do
trees.
is set an hour to talk to each one of these people that are associated with these plans.
There you go.
Lori Reed, Dave LaPointe. call
There you
them
go.
up. How's this working?
Somebody did. Voluntold. Thanks, Skip.
So also,
I can do it.
I want a little bit of experience when we were putting together one STL is, many cities said, we don't want East West Gateway telling us what to do. That was a regional plan, was, other than our transportation plan, it was the first time we tried to do something coordinated within the region, like in our history. So it was a big learning experience. So what I would say for a tree, like if we're gonna do a tree plan, you gotta do both ways. You gotta incorporate the plans of the cities that are with it enough to have those, and then be able to have enough of a structure for cities that don't have capacity to be able to create their own, to have enough resources created in a plan where they can either adopt some regional goals or create their own goals with materials that are already put together.
That's a great
Exactly.
idea.
And part of the beauty of where we're at now, where we weren't, years ago, is that we have, people like Joel and Beyond Housing and that are engaging some of those communities with forestry topics. And I mean, my perspective is the reception's been pretty phenomenal. So
far, so good.
Joe, I was gonna put you on the hot seat actually just now because I did add the Beyond Housing Urban Forestry Assessment into this list. So that was recently published with the 24-1 Normandy School District communities. And just curious if you could give us some insight into kind of how that resonated and if there's been momentum because of it.
We're starting to pick up momentum off of it. So the idea was to get a canopy analysis for the EPA grant. I believe Davey helped us do the canopy analysis. They did the whole plan for us, identified areas that we didn't really know needed more trees, and helped us identify different municipalities to reach out to, and then start trying to develop tree boards off of that to get more citizen engagement or community outreach components put in place. We're slowly chipping away at it. It's just an uphill battle, just like everybody knows, but it's there. We got a long ways to go. But
Do you feel like you have that document has given you opportunities to have conversations with people in a different way, or like the benefit of having the document versus not and maybe speak to funding?
it's helped both ways, yes. So we, talk about the amount of asthma that's in the area for the youth, we can apply for, say, hey, this is why we need more trees, and it cleans, air particulates and helps with stormwater mitigation. So that we're identifying all sorts of things from that particular plan. So, but it's helped us be able to approach the residents and approach the municipal leaders to say, let's have a sit down and discuss how to move forward. So.
Thank you. And that actually, to your point, Aaron, potentially looking at some of those types of local plans that we could use as sample cookie cutters that then could roll up into kind of key metrics for the region, how all the different plans might support those regional aspirations, potentially. I also, just from a funding standpoint, I put Euclid, Ohio on there. Their project is pending. They just got $500,000 from the IRA just to do the gosh darn plan. So if we even just say, you know what, we want to do a plan, we might be able to get funding. So, thinking about how the fact that I didn't look deep into the weeds on where that money was coming from. It was IRA money that could have been through EPA or Forest Service or some of these other federal agencies, but that's a lot for planning. And I don't know exactly all that went into it, but there's a link there to the article that talks about it. I think this is probably a good place to land now as far as what role do we each play. And I think that's potentially the sticky widget for any of these plans, is that aspirationally we can all say, yes, we want that, the region needs this, and recognize that everybody's got their day job, everybody's got their own world, and nobody necessarily has a lot of room to be holding this big project. And so understanding how we need to align what benefits and priorities do our personal and professional interests, where those align with this, you know, whatever we decide to do. So then we can start looking at how much commitment does an individual that's concerned about the topic volunteer their time, or how much does an organization that wants this, you know, consolidated roadmap to affirm what we're working on and help drive our program impacts. What then do we invest in development of this? And so maybe I'll open that up, maybe start with the city and to say, what kind of interest level is there in having something like this to begin with? And then how much of that, you know, from government standpoints is beneficial to having this collaboration, or maybe not?
No, I mean, as far as our department, I mean, it would be beneficial for us to talk to aldermen, talk to, you know, hopefully get residents behind the plan as well to push government in a different direction. So, yeah, I mean, we're all for a plan. I mean, I'm just speaking for just the forestry division at this point, not for my department. But, how much effort we could put toward it, to be determined. I think we're at a good place to help out where maybe years past we weren't in such a position.
So I got here a little bit late. I'm sorry. The Marion County Planning and Urban Design Agency. So of course, pro plan. I'm just kidding. But I think I think addressing this issue will require changes in kind of how we approach a lot of things as a city. So I do think having the plan itself, but also the process of really hearing people, you know, just speaking for Planning and Urban Design Agency, as we think about neighborhood plans, and my lane is really kind of land use and development policy, right? But the tree canopy is very important in that realm as well. I think the process of developing a plan can be a really valuable way to kind of air the complexities that I know like city operational departments have to contend with. And I'm thinking too of people who have to maintain streets, or, you know, things like that. Or even, you know, in the development world, like what are those conversations with developers like? What is it like to administer zoning? Like all of these things are very complex. And I think the process with a focus on urban tree canopy, I can see a lot of benefit in that. And I'll also just add that I think in the strategic land use plan process, we're trying to make sure that climate resilience generally, but also kind of green infrastructure, urban tree canopy are part of the conversation. But we're not the experts on that necessarily, trying to make sure other partners at the table. And I don't think we'll be able to do those issues the level of like detail and justice they deserve. So that's one planning process that the planning department is currently leading. And then I don't know if Alicia's still on.
She was online at the beginning.
I'm here.
Oh, good. I don't know if there's anything.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both you and Alan. Capacity is always an issue, but because of like how complex this is, I think working through the development of the plan will kind of align all the stars and make the priorities evident. And then we can include, you know, the information learned from these other cities that have plans, you know, that are 10 years old or so, like what came of that plan, you know, what have they learned from it, so we can, you know, kind of hit the ground running. Because for me, I feel like all solutions lead back to the trees. You know, how do we manage the stormwater? It's the trees. How do we cool down the urban heat island effect? How do we mitigate that? It's the trees. How do we improve public health? It's the trees. So I'm so glad that this conversation is happening right now, and I'll do whatever we can to support a plan. It'll just depend on, you know, who's taking what capacity we all have, really.
I want to say that there's a lot of plans going on right now already. Kind of thinking about the city's land use plan. They just put an RFP out for their sustainability plan. The county's doing a comp plan. We're doing the climate action plan. I think for the time being, we kind of use those processes now to, you know, in a way, lay out a roadmap for how to bring it all together and have a tree plan at the end. Or, I mean, there's a lot of parallels between what we need to do for a tree plan and a regional climate action plan. I think we could lay out a lot, but we won't be able to do the details, you know, of like how to implement a regional tree plan and a climate plan. But I think we could get a long way into accomplishing this with the processes already going on, as long as we keep talking about it and make sure we're aligned.
So this is exactly where I wanted to have this conversation, because the number of plans that are happening and how they all, I mean, Alicia just like spoke to my heart with it's the trees. What I have learned to be true is that people value trees, and trees is part of green infrastructure, and everyone can put trees and green infrastructure into an actionable item for climate change and pollution reduction and health improvements and blah, blah, blah. But then when it comes to the nuts and bolts of putting the trees in the ground or maintaining those trees long-term or making sure that the resources that the city has, all of that stuff, if it's not our own plan, it gets kind of assumed in those, like that the highest level of planning doesn't tackle the challenges that we've had, and trees have been in so many of these plans. We know, I think everyone can agree trees are a priority for all the reasons Alicia mentioned, but we're still running into this problem that we don't have a direction and we don't have solutions to the things that are holding back the city. So that's the question for me though, Aaron, is like, is the planning process that's currently going on for all of these things, if we don't as a community of urban forestry priority focus folks tell these plans how to incorporate trees into them and how we're able to do the thing and what we need in order to do it, then we're letting, I love the planners and the designers, but there's a different perspective that then is the assumption of what tree people need in forestry, and you know, all of us
That's where you come in.
need.
The doer.
I know, right, the doer. And so I think that's my preference, is to be telling the plans what the trees need rather than the plan saying we need the trees. And so I want to be cognizant of that, I guess. Alan, did you want to jump in there?
I think you nailed it there. It's just, we have, I think the inner city, our inner core, urban core is kind of hollowed out, right? In St. Louis. And now we have the great opportunity to create neighborhoods, create environments where people want to live and be. You see these other cities, everybody's been to these growing cities where they have greenways, they have green spaces within all of their neighborhoods. And we didn't have that in St. Louis and a lot of these really dense areas. And how do we create that to draw that population back in?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick point what you were saying. Right now, while we planning these 6 neighborhoods around the NGA, this is really the perfect time for the forestry department to come in as we planning and designing. We'll know how to situate, because the streets are not going to be the same straight down this block, this block, this block. They're going to be, you know, walkways and pathways within the community. So this will be the time to put them plans in, have a forestry representative at our neighborhood meetings. Those monthly neighborhood meetings, as the process going, you can kind of explain to the residents, this will be that outreach you're talking about, that we could be ahead of the outreach and the planning process as we go along. That way we don't come back after somebody designs something and we got to try to move it around.
put in those 15-foot tree lawns with that structure.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. So in an interest of time, and I'm so proud of this group for all the participation and 5 o'clock time frame right at the end of the slide. So thank you. Is next steps. And I guess I would like to propose that we create a task force of maybe a few people that don't want to walk this lonely road with trees all by themselves. But that we could start exploring like kind of dig deep into the conversation that was happening today. Think about what maybe we could pitch back as recommendations for next steps that would get us kind of to the next level, maybe digest the notes. I'll work on that with maybe Ian to look at what kind of came out of this. And so my hope.
And those of us doing the plans can come to this task force to get
Absolutely.
the right stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Good to have that center of people consult.
exactly.
One of the beautiful things about trees, even planning for trees, is that there are exceptions, but for the most part, it's non-controversial. I mean, it's one of the easiest cells on the planet, right? No pun intended. I mean, it's.
I mean, Elijah about people who
Yeah.
don't like trees.
I've been there, but
So.
I don't know, I think this is such an easy sell to do this. That one of the things that we need to think about in terms of next steps, I love the idea of having a little bit smaller group focused and regular meeting times. But it'd sure be nice, and this is dreaming big, sure be nice to have a champion, you know, like who's our champion? And that's code for corporate sponsor. Who's our champion? You know, why is Forest Park, that's one of the reasons Forest Park's so successful. They have champions, not just one, they have champions. We need champions. And there's no reason why this topic cannot attract champions. If Forest Park can attract champions, trees can attract champions. I've always said that, and I don't know. I'd love to get into somebody's boardroom and say, hey, man, you want to do trees?
I'd like, I worked for the city and helped work on the Forest Park Master Plan, and I just want to underscore that Forest Park forever existed before the master plan, but it took off exponentially once there was the master plan. So
Yes.
I really applaud what, everybody's trying to do,
The plan
because
is the focus.
the plan was absolutely the focus. And once there was the plan, because there was a lot of controversy around Forest Park, those are old enough to remember, about different projects and whatever. But once everybody sort of said, put all their cards on the table, said, this is where we're going, then the money flowed.
It's a great point.
And the results were.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I know a lot of you get a chance to travel a lot. You go to other cities and talking green things and this and that. It's what I do. I can't go anywhere without the minute somebody knows you're from St. Louis. Oh my God, I love Forest Park. It's a national showpiece. Enough. Next steps.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to, and so I think for me, we ended with a lot, potentially more questions than answers, but that's exactly what my hope was for the conversation. And what I will say kind of for a follow-up will be that what I'd like to do is put together a little survey that I will send to people that have participated. I promise it'll be 10 questions or less. But as far as just kind of capturing some next steps, capturing some interest, thinking about how we can take the next best step, and kind of everybody simmer on that. And I'd be happy to be that kind of sounding board as you start thinking through how this may or may not help or hurt what you're looking to do. And, send me that feedback. I'll send a survey out in the next little bit. And then from there, we'll kind of incrementally move. Does that sound good to the folks in the room? Great. Anything else we need to cover? Yes.
The discussions about funding, I was thinking people need to look at, so is there some deadlines for seeing?
Yes and no. There's all of this money
Timeline.
and it's debilitating to figure out how to, it's like if you think about one of those like shoe carnival whirlwinds where all the money's blowing around and you have to like grab it, but you can't. That's kind of what this feels like. So yes, the sooner the better. If we could get our act together to get something that was really meaningful and relevant and action oriented, where we could confidently put a community change grant on the table next month, like we could get millions of dollars by October. If you know of the, like, yes.
We
We
said
could,
Ohio got a $500,000 to plan it.
right? I don't know the details of
Yeah.
any of that stuff, but it's possible. The EPA community change grants are kind of a flowing thing. This funding that was released today, I'm not sure what the NOFO like timeline is. But it's not, the money's there now, it's not gonna be there forever, so the sooner we get our act together and ask for it, the better. But,
I think this could be pitched to MDC as well.
and MDC, absolutely. Thank you all online.
And just a few.
Thank you.
Comments before we wrap up. There were a lot of comments online that we didn't get to, but they'll be saved and I'll share them all with Meredith. And is it all right if we send out the slides to everyone?
Yes.
So attendants, so they can see those links. And then last thing, Miriam Keller, who's here, is going to be sharing at the next lab about the city's strategic land use plan, March 26th at 3:45. So we're all looking forward to that. After the lab, everyone in person is welcome to gather at T-Rex's lounge and we can have some drinks and chat. Unfortunately, I have a mandatory event I have to be at, but everyone else is welcome to go there after the lab. But thanks to all for coming. So I'll go ahead and end.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thanks for hosting this.
Thank you.